Hello, my dear friends, and welcome to another episode of Europa Rediviva. Today, I'd like to speak about a plague that is affecting Western democracies, and that plague is populism. After the fall of the communist regime in Romania, after 1990, an entire generation of political science scholars was trained by the United States through various grant programs in order to teach the Romanians what democracy is. Because apparently you need some sort of scientific preparation to understand the fact that people stamp ballots and the outcome is called democracy. Apparently, it's not as simple. So it's very easy to confuse democracy with populism. And this is why these guardians were trained by the United States in order to constantly tell the Romanians how to avoid populism. Because you might think that if the majority of the population wants a certain direction, then that's the democratic thing to do. But no, this is the illusion that populists want you to fall into. And this is why political science faculties were established in order to teach generations of students that the interests of the majority are most of the times nationalistic, communist, if it's about economic redistribution, and more, uh, even more so, populist. Populism is the great peril of democracy. Populism is this phenomenon that takes place when the people who were voted in office try to advance the interests of the majority of the citizens rather than to advance the interests of the international financial capital. So this is why there's this entire press, this entire Western press scolding citizens whenever they vote for people who improve living conditions or who try to advance the interests of that country. So they either get labeled as communists or as fascists, depending on what the angle of their ideology is. If they're social democrats, they want to raise living standards, they want to raise the minimum wage, they want to raise the quality of the public services and the welfare system, then they're labeled communist. And if they want to advance the interest of the country abroad, if they want to stop taking orders from the United States or from Israel or from, well, Ukraine nowadays, they are called nationalists and therefore fascists. And of course, they also have to be kept out of power, even though this might be in the interest of the majority of the population, and the majority of the population might vote for those things. But this generation of US trained and US funded scholars in Romania taught us that democracy is what they say, not what the people want. What the people want is populism, because the people are stupid and you should not allow the people to ruin your democracy. This is the main tenet that the oligarchic class in the United States taught them in these fellowship programs. And I grew up with this idea that the majority vote in Romania was populist, not democratic, and that people voted for all sorts of things which were in their favor, and therefore it was really petty and selfish. Instead of voting for values, instead of voting for moral clarity, for principles, as one should, and as of course the United States and Israel and all of its colonies are run by. So you have to align yourself to these holy principles. But luckily this changed. So nowadays Romanians vote only for the correct path. They no longer care about their living standards. They no longer care about the situation of the economy, about the national interest of the country. They have been successfully educated by these educators to whom we are very grateful that the United States sent us after 1990. And as a result, whenever some lowlife tries to bring up the argument that people should vote for whatever improves their welfare, he's shouted down by the rest and told that he's a populist, a communist, a fascist, and that he better learn what democracy is, and not just to fall into the populist trap, as he might want to do. And of course, the politicians who try to cater for the public good and who try to cater for the national interest are the worst. They're the populists, and this is why all sorts of judicial measures should be employed against them in order to prevent them from running for office, or in case they get elected, to jail them so as to set an example that populism shall not be tolerated. A democracy can only be defended with harsh means, because otherwise you have the populists taking over and reversing the bright and shiny path of moral rectitude. So, and we don't want that. And I was very well vaccinated against populism, of course, and then I moved abroad. I moved to the Netherlands. I moved to the West, and I noticed something very strange. I was shocked to see that the inhabitants of the place, the Westerners that we were brought up to worship, voted for populist parties. I was frankly shocked. Like, I thought from the tales of these political scientists in Romania, I was told that they only live with air and they vote only for moral rectitude. They only vote for principles, and those principles are highly theoretic. They're highly theoretical. They're not in any way selfish. They do not mean to advance their own interests. They just live with air, and they vote the moral rectitude way. They vote according to what the Economist writes, according to what Financial Times writes, according to what is best for for the for the for the correct principles. It is a vote that needs to take care of the correct principles, and the correct principles are the ones espoused by the corporate media, by the owners of financial capital, of international financial capital, through the newspapers that they control. In Romania, for example, there is this Swiss publishing house, this Swiss media group that also has some tabloids, and those tabloids pay alleged left-wing influencers as columnists to always bring about the high principles. So whenever there's something that's to the detriment of the population and to the detriment of the country, these so-called left-wing, I don't know how to call them, because they're not academics, they're not necessarily trained in political science, they're just good people. You know, the United States Embassy chose them as good people, and Ringier, this Swiss media conglomerate, pays them because they're good people, because this is what happens in capitalism. People who are good at heart just receive money for it. So these people constantly berate the population whenever it tries to vote in its own interest, and always manage to uphold the interest of America, Israel, and Western corporations whenever these interests are somehow threatened by some sort of populist upheaval by the local inhabitants of Romania. So this is how corporate media works. It just pays good people to tell the truth, because this is the business model in capitalism. This is how you maximize profit. You just employ people who are good at heart, and you just let them tell whatever they think is true. And as a consequence of this, the electorate votes. The electorate can identify the correct principles in order to vote for them. So if you don't know for who to vote, just find the intellectuals that are sponsored by the U.S. Embassy. Look where they publish. Look what media outlets they publish in, and see which candidate they support. And beware of anybody who says that you should support a certain candidate because he will raise living standards, or because he will somehow cater to the national interest. No, that's disgusting. That's selfish. That's nationalistic. That's crude, barbaric, communist, and all encompassing, it is populist. So beware of populists, beware of people whom you delegate through your vote to improve the material and cultural and political and economic situation of your country. No, you should vote for principles. You should vote for moral clarity. You should vote for the candidates that are sponsored by the US Embassy and that always have moral clarity at heart. Because, as we know, the United States built its empire on moral clarity. It simply took over the world by being extremely moral. And it is the beacon of freedom and democracy, and whichever candidate the US Embassy supports is the one that will improve the moral lives of the people. Maybe not the material life, but the moral life for sure, because they can rest assured from that point onwards that they have done what's good and that they stood on the on the morally correct side of things. This being said, coming from this mental universe in Romania, in which you prove your education and you prove your belonging to the educated part of the public by voting not according to interest, which is barbaric and crude, but according to other people's interest, which is the morally correct way to do. So after developing my political identity in this way and seeking out what's the moral clarity of every situation from what the U.S. grant recipients were saying, then I moved to Western Europe, and I've lived in the Netherlands, in Belgium, in Spain, and in all these countries, I've noticed a very disturbing picture. The fact that the citizens there could not care less about the moral high ground, could not care less about moral clarity and about ethical rectitude and about the principles of goods in the world, and they actually voted to improve their living standards, to maintain and improve their living standards. And any candidate, any political party who would have thought of standing for election, having as an electoral platform mass privatizations of public services, reduction of the welfare system, and so on, would have not stood a chance in entering parliament. However, in Romania, such parties win the elections, and such parties make up the coalition governments. And it doesn't matter who you vote for. You vote for the Social Democrats, they're going to bring in a government minister in the Ministry of Health that will say that the system needs to be privatized from the Social Democrats. Why? Because they are no longer beholden to these sovereigntist ideas. They're no longer tainted by populism, and they brought in people who serve the moral rectitude. They serve the public good, not the welfare of the citizens, but the theoretical idea of good in general. So all of my previous friends, the ones I had until 2021 and who consider that I've gone insane for abandoning this path of the vertical rectitude and of the moral clarity, still vote to this day with whatever the scholarship recipients of the US Embassy tells them. And they consider this to be the morally good thing to do, and voting for national interest or for the welfare of the citizens is something abhorrent, is something disgusting, is something that only uneducated people, unlike them, tend to do. So if you vote for your own interest, it means you are a selfish person, and you also are very poor, you come from the lower rungs of society, and you are barbaric, so you have not learned civilization. Civilization means to no longer regard your own material welfare as being the guiding line of your decisions, but to guide yourself from the high principles of these public philosophers, these public thinkers, who have the public good at heart and who receive money from the US Embassy to tell you what is the correct path, what is the correct political path to take, so that you don't you don't get fooled by the populists. And it works very well in Romania. So Romania is a very good example of a country. Okay, it might not exist in 2030. So if you watch this in 2030 and you ask yourself, what is Romania? Well, look it up maybe on the internet Wayback Machine or something like this, and you'll find out that such a country existed. And anyway, it was very moral, very correct, only on the good and moral side of history. It was standing with Ukraine, with Israel, with the United States, with Taiwan, with all the good countries in this world, and upholding the public good until it finally disappeared. But anyway, if you watch this before 2030, yeah, Romania is the most righteous country in the world. It has embarked itself solidly on this path of principles, and it will not abandon it, no matter the sacrifices on the local population. So, the material welfare of the local population is crashing, and Romania is taking up more and more debt in order to honor these contracts of principle, procurement contracts with Western governments to buy up all sorts of things that, well, in some cases we don't need, and in other cases they don't even exist, like quantum AI data centers, the newest snake oil idea of the United States to sell to its colonies. But anyway, so I was shocked that in Western Europe, people do not vote according to principle. People are so selfish that when they go to the polls, they put the stamp on the party which at least promises to deliver an increase in their living standards. And I find this absolutely abhorrent. This is why the West is not what it used to be, and this is why the West is degrading. It has lost its moral compass, and the citizens have become selfish. The citizens have started to vote in their own interest, instead of voting in the interest of what's right, of what's objectively good, which is the maximization of profits of the international financial capital. We all know that this is what the absolute good is. The absolute evil, we also know, it's the Holocaust. So whenever the propaganda machine of the U.S. Embassy tries to manufacture the consent of the people with regard to some foreign intervention, with regard to some bombing of civilians, of schools, of children, of refugees, and so on, or to steal the resources of some country, the leader of that country is first painted in these Hitleresque colors, so as to bring the population on board that the civilized world can no longer tolerate such barbarity. So be it Gaddafi, Assad, Saddam, Maduro, the scholarship recipients of the U.S. Embassy never missed the chance to point out that these are the moral equivalents of Hitler, and that they need to be taken out of power by any means necessary. And whoever opposes it is anti-Semitic. So I'm glad that we live in such a world where moral rectitude is always followed, and I'm glad to be a citizen of such a country like Romania, where people simply bow to the U.S. Embassy as if it were the golden calf. They worship the embassy of the United States and of Israel because they are the moral guidelines of our world. So, too bad that here in the West, here in Western Europe, the citizens have yet to understand the benefits of civilization, and they have yet to learn what makes a country pro-Western. So somehow, for the fact that they're Western, they seem to forget the fact that they need to maintain the pro-Western path. And this is why they fall into all sorts of traps laid out by populists. I was telling you in a previous episode that when I started voting in the Dutch elections, I voted for the centrist party, which in the Netherlands is VVD. It's basically the Renew Europe party that was in power since 2010, and now it's its sister party, D66, which is also Renew Europe. And unlike its Romanian affiliate, these parties do not want to privatize everything. They're neoliberal in the sense that they favor Dutch capital. They favor the Dutch capitalist class, and because the Netherlands is a rather entrepreneurial society, and there are a lot of people who are self-employed or who have small businesses, then this actually makes a constituency in its own right. People who have small businesses vote for themselves. They vote to advance their own interests through these neoliberal parties that try to expand their influence abroad and so on. But the people who vote for out of moral rectitude with the Renew Europe affiliate of Romania, they also vote for neoliberalism, but they vote for neoliberalism in a colonial sense. So if Dutch people voting for Renew Europe, or even French people voting for Macron, they do it for imperialistic reasons, the people of Burkina Faso or of the Democratic Republic of the Congo or of Niger or of Romania who vote for such interests vote for the neo-colonial tie, which is unidirectionate. They do not vote to replicate the living standards of France or to advance the interests of their own capital, their own domestic capital, because they don't have any domestic capital. Because everything in the neo-colonies is owned by the foreign capital. And therefore, by voting for the imperialist party, the citizens of these neo-colonies just strengthen the neo-colonial bond. They do the reverse of what the people of France or of the Netherlands obtain when they vote in these parties that advance the interests of the capital of their own respective countries. It's I know it's a tough thing to digest, the fact that absolute good does not exist in international politics, and that when an Israeli votes for Ben Gvir is not the same as when a Palestinian votes for Ben Gvir, even though in the Israeli press Ben Gvir might be touted as the absolute good. But yeah, this is a lesson that the Romanian citizenry has yet to learn, and there are all of these people who make up the so-called civil society that make sure that Romanians will not learn this lesson. Coincidentally, the civilian leader of this terrorist brigade that is operating on the territory of Romania, advocating for terrorist attacks and promising political assassinations, used to be the president of the local chapter in Brasov of the first organization that was created through these transatlantic mechanisms for advancing democracy. The Pro-Democracy Association, it was called. I think it still exists. It was founded by this Romanian political scientist, which I think is the most famous. He's the most quoted whenever people go to polls. He's the one telling the Romanians not to vote for their own interest, but to vote for what's morally, objectively good, which comes out of the scholarships of the United States. So this is how democracy is perceived and social dialogue. And coincidentally, this same guy, the leader of this terrorist organization, was awarded the Prize for Social Dialogue 3 weeks ago, also 3 years ago, for allegedly promoting social dialogue, because apparently if you make an assassination list, if you make a hit list and you promise to assassinate the political dissidents of your country, this is fostering social dialogue in the understanding of the US Embassy. Not unlike what they did in Latin America. So there was an institution called School of the Americas, which despite its name was not like Patrice Lumumba University of the Peoples in Moscow, where people, intellectual elites from the decolonized countries went on to receive professional training into becoming agricultural experts, education experts, and so on. Now, the School of the Americas in the United States trained guerrillas to conduct insurgencies against left-wing governments in Latin America that had been voted in democratically. So if your country votes in democratically a left-wing party, and because Latin America has so much inequality, it's obvious why people would vote for a left-wing party in order to enact land reform and redistribution and so on, and industrialization, because most of these countries are just plantations for cash crops. Then the United States, through their scholarship recipients from the School of the Americas, set up these guerrilla movements, which essentially kidnap and torture civilians. This is their number one modus operandi. And Latin America is plagued with decades of such events. It's beyond the scope of my video to take maybe half an hour to list all the terrorist movements that the United States upheld in Latin America, trained and financed and armed and offered intellectual support at the School of the Americas. But Romania has become a Latin American country in itself. Romania is also run in the same way. Lawfare operations were also prominent in Latin America in replacing the elected governments which were left-wing and which could not be ousted through the means of terrorist guerrillas. And so the justice system was infiltrated, and all sorts of judges paid for by the US Embassy sent to jail all sorts of sovereigntist left-wing leaders. The same thing is going on in Romania. So we have the lawfare operations in the judicial system. We have the guerrilla, the terrorist organization, which is upheld by the Romanian presidency and by the US Embassy. And we have the civil society always telling the peasants not to fall into the trap of voting for their own interests, but to vote for what's morally good and what comes out of the American financial press, which, as we know, is always selfless, and the capitalist system just serves the public good. It serves no particular private interests. So this is what I wanted to tell you today. Those who like what I do, like, share, subscribe. You can join my Telegram channel. I post there some other videos apart from the ones that I make of some other creators that I enjoy. And until next time, take care. Bye.